Finally, one more thought. Hemingway wrote that the first panacea for a mismanaged nation is inflation of the currency. The world has seen a fair amount of inflation over the past few years, whether from mismanagement or otherwise. Turkey this week could brag that it had made great strides in its fight against inflation, getting the rate down to a mere 52%, which is certainly better than the 62% of the month before, thanks to interest rates of 50%.
By the end of next year, we expect the inflation rate to come down to around 33%. That's still higher than the central bank's forecast of 14% by the end of next year. If the central bank is going to be sincere in achieving the 14% year-end goal by the end of 2025, there needs to be a more significant deceleration and disinflation program.
For years now, Japan has been struggling with the opposite problem, a yen that hasn't been inflated enough, leading to hyper-low interest rates that the central bank is just starting to raise, throwing the markets into a different sort of turmoil.
The yen has been particularly weak and inflation has actually been pretty strong in Japan itself. So I think the new incoming Prime Minister, whoever he is, will actually be very, very cognizant of the fact that, you can't have the yen too weak. And that in turn might actually lead to a shift where the policy of the Japanese yen is concerned.
Though Governor Ueda says he'll stay the course if prices keep going up.
If we are unable to confirm a rising certainty that the economy and prices will stay in line with forecasts, then there's no change to our stance and will continue to adjust the degree of easing.
Great Britain has certainly put its pound sterling to the test, first with Brexit hitting growth prospects, and then with Liz Truss proposing a budget that sent bond markets into a tailspin.
We saw it happen in the UK when Liz Truss announced her mini budget, and then people worried about sustainability. Suddenly interest rates spiked and you couldn't adjust that.
But Keir Starmer's new Labour government was rewarded this week with demand for his bonds that matched the record and brought in £110 billion. And of course, in the United States, we saw that spike in inflation in 2022, which led to a rapid and dramatic hike in interest rates.
They have to slow the economy down sufficiently to generate enough slack in the labor market so wage trends come down to be consistent with 2% inflation.
That drove the dollar higher, though that may be turning around even as inflation comes down.
The dollar has clearly weakened in the last 5 weeks against the majors. One of the reasons this has happened is because the Fed has moved in a much more towards a much more dovish narrative in the last few weeks.
But of all policies that have driven currencies up, down, and all around, the most dramatic probably is found, as before, in Argentina. President Javier Milei promised to get runaway inflation back under control, inflation that had peaked as high as 290% a year, cutting the value of the peso to 1,400 to the dollar. In his battle with ever higher prices, President Milei cut subsidies to the provinces, leading one of them, La Rioja, simply to run out of money. So the governor took things into his own hands. He decided to issue a new currency to replace the peso, dubbed the chacho, and began handing it out to government employees who make up about 2/3 of the province's workforce. No word yet on what President Milei thinks of the chacho, but it didn't seem like what he had in mind when he talked with our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, back in April.
But when you also ask around for the word that reflects the sentiment of Argentines now, you know what it is? Hope. Even though we are undertaking the largest adjustment in the history of humanity, my approval ratings are on the rise because people know that I'm telling them the truth.
Let's see whether that truth includes the chacho.